I've got a lovely bunch of con badges, dee for big cons, small cons. Some I don't exactly remember where they came from. I should have thought this intro out a little better. Oh well. Hey everyone, my name is Stormi the Folf, and today I thought I'd cover a topic that I don't think has been covered quite well with regards to the furry fandom, and that's comparing big furry conventions to smaller furry conventions. Now, when you think about furry cons, what's the first one that pops up in your head? Is it Anthrocon, maybe Midwest Fur Fest, or BLFC? These are some of the more well-known furry conventions, at least in the United States. However, what about the smaller, lesser-known conventions? If you've ever been to a smaller convention, especially one that's just started, that has like a less than 1,000 attendees or so, you may have noticed some differences compared to a larger and more well-known convention. Or what if, just what if, you've never been to a furry convention at all? Let's see if we can dissect some of the differences, the pros and cons when it comes to choosing between a bigger furry convention or a smaller furry convention, and maybe figure out which one might be right for you. So last year, Midwest Fur Fest was the largest recorded furry convention to date with an astounding 8,771 attendees. That's a lot of furries. But you can still attend a furry convention while identifying as a furry as well, so, I don't know, let's just say that's a lot of people. When I was there, it was like almost every furry I knew through social media was able to make it as well. It was overwhelming, exciting, and amazing all at the same time. There was always something to do. I wanted to buy everything in the dealer's den, and there were so many panels to go to, it'd make your head spin. But what made MFF for me in a nutshell was meeting so many of my online friends and other people who knew me online. It blew my mind to potato and back. And while the convention was an absolute blast, unfortunately, like most bigger convention trips that I plan, things don't always go as scheduled, or I seriously miscalculate how long it might take to do something, or how fast I might have to be to get something before it sells out. Hotel rooms. And I'm almost guaranteed to get lost at least one time in a con hotel because I have a poor sense of direction. There's often a lot more money on the line as well, and because it's such a popular convention, that means navigating through a lot of fluffy crowds. In my opinion though, the stress and the rush of it all was completely worth it. It's a 4-day weekend I will never ever forget. Okay. Now let's talk about smaller conventions. By smaller cons, I'm referring to those with an attendance count of under 1,000 or so. Last year, I attended a small furry convention known as Emerald Fur Con, but they're now known as Emerald Fur Summit. Anyway, the con takes place in Pensacola, Florida every year. It was their very first year, and it was a one-day event. Their attendance total for the day was only 126 people. So yeah, kind of hard to compare attendance differences between EFS and MFF. But there's more to convention comparisons than just how many people are going. And just because there aren't as many furries, doesn't mean you still can't have a little fun. Once I arrived to the convention's hotel, picking up my badge was quick and painless. It was a breeze. There was no line to wait on. It was instant. Although pre-registration was required beforehand if you wanted to get in. The main floor area was fairly small but sized appropriately for our small attendance number. And like other furry conventions, there was a dealer's den, artist alley, and a few panels you could catch up on. But again, because this is a smaller gathering, the convention schedule isn't as busy and doesn't have as many panels or events compared to what you might find at Anthrocon or MFF. And that's not necessarily a bad thing for reasons I'll get into in a moment. I also ran into a few furs I knew locally at EFS. I didn't really know anyone else that attended at the time, but that's okay. That just means there's more furry friends to make. Things at smaller conventions feel a little slower and sometimes less hectic. If you have crowd anxiety or you feel pressure to always move fast and cover everything you can, a smaller convention might be right for you. But okay, so let's do a little pros and cons with bigger furry conventions versus smaller furry conventions. First thing, money. It's the thing we always run out of when we need it the most. And naturally, bigger furry conventions often cost more to attend. Badges cost more, hotel rooms cost more, parking can cost more, and unfortunately that is the cost of running a popular fandom gathering when you have almost 10,000 people clustered in a small area. Think of it like living in the city versus living in the suburbs. One is always going to cost more than the other. Smaller furry conventions are often cheaper when it comes to registration and hotel rooms. Things to do. It's no secret that bigger fur cons often have a schedule filled to the brim with events for pretty much everyone who's even slightly interested in the furry fandom. You've got dance competitions, you have a rave, dealer's den, artist alley, fursuit parades, and sometimes vendors will have entire rooms dedicated specifically to selling their own particular merchandise. Smaller furry conventions may lack things like this, especially a fursuit parade or dance comps, especially if the convention is just starting out. Things like this might be a deal breaker for some, but shouldn't entirely disinterest you from attending the convention in general. At least I wouldn't let that get to me anyway. I go to fur cons for a lot more than just a fursuit parade. Claustrophobia. If you don't handle crowds well and you've never attended a furry convention before, take my advice. Attend a fur meet first, and if you want to go to a con, I'd advise you to start with a smaller convention. Bigger conventions are naturally going to be more crowded and more packed. I know when I was at MFF last year, it was literally almost impossible to squeeze into the dealer's den at some points. If Anthrocon or MFF are a must for you, please don't go alone, especially if it's your first time. It can be a nightmare if you're not prepared. Don't let something like this, however, push you away from attending one of these conventions. Smaller conventions are usually less crowded in comparison because, well, obviously there are less people there. Meeting other furries. Attending a furry con is, in my opinion, one of the best ways to meet and connect with other furries. While you have a pretty good chance of meeting furries you know online or follow on social media through a much larger furry convention, you're also less likely to meet a furry celebrity at a smaller furry convention that's just getting started. That doesn't mean it won't happen. It just won't be as likely. If you just want to make new furry friends, either choice will suffice, honestly. That being said, however, if you do opt for a smaller convention choice, you'll have a much better chance of speaking with someone like the guest of honor or even one of the convention leaders. Location. This is a tricky topic to decipher in all honesty. Depending on where you live, you might be closer to smaller furry conventions as opposed to something like FWA or BLFC. But the opposite can also be true. Living next to bigger furry conventions can also mean living within close proximity to larger furry meetups, if that makes sense. So, in all honesty, location can go both ways. Maybe I shouldn't have talked about that. I don't know, it's so hot in here, and I have the air conditioner turned off because I don't want a bunch of noise getting into the mic, and it's like 75 degrees outside, and I feel like it's 120 in my fursuit head. Fun factor. For most of us, furry conventions are akin to how the average Joe in the US might rank a trip to Disney World or Universal Studios or some other theme park. They're an absolute blast, and we make memories we'll never forget. If the idea of having more panels and events to choose from tickles your fancy, along with being surrounded by a lot more furries, a larger convention might be right for you. However, if you prefer to be in a less crowded environment, you get claustrophobic easily, and you want to save some money, perhaps you should choose a smaller convention. Either way, I strongly suggest bringing a friend with you, or at the very least meeting up with someone you already know at the convention. Just in case I haven't said it before, you don't want to dive into a busy furry gathering alone and not know anyone there. And while bigger furry conventions often have more stuff to do, they can also be quite overwhelming, especially if you're new to FurCon experiences. Smaller cons can seem less stressful, but if you're expecting an infinite amount of stuff to do on the con schedule, as well as dozens of panels, you might choose the former over the latter. One last thing I wanted to talk about, I just now thought this up. Registering and getting a hotel room for a smaller convention can often be a lot less stressful than trying to score a main hotel room at MFF. If you know anything about getting a hotel room for a convention, it can feel like you're playing the Hunger Games or something. It's like survival of the fittest or survival of the fastest typist of who can type out their names and credit card numbers fast enough to get a room. Whereas if you're trying to get a room at, say, like FangCon, you actually have a few months of spare time you don't have to register and get a room right away, because rooms for smaller conventions typically don't sell out within less than 30 seconds. But yeah, I'm burning up and I'm not making a lot of sense, but I'm trying my best. But in conclusion, the choice is all up to you. You pick the convention you feel you'd be most comfortable at. Also, this video isn't meant to criticize any convention out there, or anyone in general really. Whether you have 100 furries or 10,000 furries, I just want to help those newer to furry conventions better understand what they may be getting into. If you've never ever attended a convention before, maybe start by going to a few fur meets, move up to a smaller convention, and eventually maybe attend the likes of Midwest Fur Fest or another large fur con. Or you could dive face first into the world's largest furry convention, MFF. Just don't do this alone, please. In the future, I want to do more videos on convention experience that cover more tips and tricks on how to better your experience at any convention you might go to. If you enjoyed this video, or if you found it helpful, consider giving it a like, maybe leave a comment, subscribe if you haven't, and share it with anyone else who has concerns about going to a convention. And of course, if you have any stories you'd like to share on why you may prefer larger or smaller conventions, let me know in the comments below. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye!